Hi there, I'm John from CNCKing.com, and you guessed it, we made more banks. I'm not quite sure why, but I found over time that some letters are definitely top sellers and others are a little bit more rare. So for instance, there's a lot of kids named Zoe for some reason. There's a lot of kids with A's and B's and C's and J's and that kind of stuff. So what I'm doing is building up inventory, but I'm learning now from customers that some letters I should have more inventory than others because, for instance, there's not a lot of kids named starting with an R for some reason. Like there's Richard and that kind of stuff, and Rachel, but R is not as popular as A. So for instance here, we have two A's. There's a bunch more there, of course. But the reason I want to show you this is because I want to show you the repeatability and the uniqueness of each bank. So these are both A's, identical design, made at the same time. Of course, one after the other, but same production run, everything's the same, but they're still very, very different. If you look at the grain pattern, it's easier to see on the back because you don't have the reflective acrylic. So you can see here, they even have a different sort of grain pattern, all that kind of stuff. And of course, on the website, you could customize it even further with different finishing options, different acrylic fronts, engraving on the back, and so forth. So although, we might sell a lot of A's, each A is unique as a snowflake. When it comes to making things with CNC machines, there's a few reasons why you actually use a machine like this instead of power tools or hand tools or anything else like that. Number one is precision. Right now, what I'm doing now, you can do with a jointer, which I have in the shop now, or I can use the CNC machine. The CNC machine is faster, it's more precise, and it's more accurate. And what I mean by that is when it flattens a board like you see here, I do both sides, of course, is totally dead flat to the bottom table that you see moving back and forth. Now that's important because when I flip it around again, now I have a completely dead flat surface, and then I run this machine once more time, and I have a perfect perfect seams for glue ups. And that's huge because it saves me a tremendous amount of time. Doing this stuff with a jointer, although would roughly take the same amount of time, the jointer can always be off a little bit, for a fraction of an angle. And because of that, your glue ups might be a little bit more iffy. And of course, for something with so many things glued together, there can be issues. So that's why for me, at least for now, I use the CNC machine to do that. Now, once things are glued up, of course, things move around a little bit during the glue up process. And that's why I use the machine again. Now, you gotta remember, I only flatten two sides. And those two sides are what the glue seams come together. I didn't glue the other two sides, which is where you can see the height inconsistencies really well because of the light I have under the gantry. So what I'm doing now is flattening it so that all those inconsistencies are gone. All the glue seams that came up the top or the bottom of the glue up for the laminated slab that I made are gone as well. And you can actually see it really well in the camera here. And you can see how there's a little bit of a lifted area, but as I go over it over and over again, you see that it completely disappears. And the seams are so tight you don't even notice them unless there's a little bit of a change in the grain pattern. Now, what I'm also doing is marking it with a pencil because I'm having a hard time seeing what was done, what was not done. So with a pencil right away, it doesn't affect the wood, it doesn't stain the wood or anything like that. The router doesn't affect the bit whatsoever. And so when I mark it with a pencil and the bit or the router goes over it, what that does is removes the pencil, but by default, I know that by removing the pencil, I also shaved off the problem areas that I noticed. Sometimes what I do is I do circles over certain areas that I notice, and those kind of things. Now, of course, these are generational banks, kids banks, adult banks, institutional banks, whatever kind of bank I end up making with it. It doesn't really matter too much, but I prefer to be as accurate and as precise as I possibly can when I make these, because it just makes my job easier down the line. If I have, visible glue seams, all these kind of things here with a finished bank, then when I get time to assembly, well, how am I going to remove that? It's a bit of a pain to remove this stuff after the fact. And the CNC just does such a wonderful job. So it's easier to get, the quality control at every step of the process, and it's always easier to get that done as early in the process as possible. Now, of course, here now you can see you got the outline of the banks. Those are the chamfers. And I really enjoy doing the chamfers because it tells me right away if everything's going to fit. When I first started making these banks, it's just trial and error basically. But you're not sure as to the spacing you get away with. You're not sure as to the placement, what's optimal and all these kind of things. So after over a year, now I know what I'm doing, and this works really, really well. You'll notice that there's a lot of A's here, and that's because for some odd reason people love A's. They name their kids, Aaron, Albert, that kind of stuff. And as a result, Audrey, A's are pretty popular. C as well, and B. So I made a bunch of those while I'm doing these other ones. You also notice the heart bank there. That's an update to the heart bank I made, 7-8 months ago. And again, it doesn't matter the shape that I'm doing. The updates that I do for the letter banks are the same updates I do for the shape banks. It's the same concept. So that's why after all of this accumulating knowledge making these banks, any shape works because I know what to watch out for now, which I didn't know, a year and a bit ago when I first started going down this journey with my ShopBot. What I'm doing here is I'm using the vacuum to clean out the areas. I found that, the machine I have, it doesn't matter if stuff's in front of the bit or not. It makes absolutely no difference. It's so powerful and it's so, nothing gets in its way. If we put a car at the end of the gantry, it'd push the car over. It's ridiculous how strong this machine is and how easy this work is by comparison. But what I have found is those little bits sometimes get some speed because they get hit by a spinning bit, and if it grabs it just the right way, it goes flying. So it's just one less issue that I need to contend with. Now, what I'm doing now is cutting out the banks, as you can see. That's a two-step process. The first step is the roughing bit, and that gets rid of most of the crap. And then after that, I go with a finishing bit to give a nice, clean edge for everything. And again, that's something that it's easier to do with the machine now than it is to do after the fact, because these are all rounded and different shapes and angles and stuff. And that's a lot of trouble to sand. I've learned that the hard way. So that's why I try to do as much as I possibly can with the machine. And if it takes longer to do it right, that's fine. Something I want to explain a little bit further is that why I have two different sort of alphabets on sandboxranch.com. And the reason for that, some people like square ones that stand out a little bit more. Some people like more curvy ones, which is what these ones are. So obviously this is a curvy one. There's no sharp corners in it other than, of course, the inside of the A. And I'll be redesigning that slightly over time to be a little bit more rounded and that kind of stuff, sort of fit with the theme. Now, you can see here the square ones. You notice the square ones are a lot bigger than the round ones. And the reason for that is because when you make something square, you lose a lot of area on the inside that you sort of have to make up for. Of course, I can make these banks all the same size, which is how I originally started sandboxranch.com. Everything was the same size. But then I found out, through feedback and that kind of stuff, that really the square ones were having issues because they couldn't hold as much. So the easiest solution to that, and basically the only solution I could come up with, was to make them slightly bigger. Now you can see here the B. Let's put a round B right next to it. So the difference between this B and this one, obviously this one's square, this one's rounded, but the difference in height, or in proportional height, because I proportion them like this and like this, it's only 1 inch. So 1 inch difference is almost nothing. But when you look at it visually, there's a massive difference between the two B's. And that's what has been following through for both alphabets. Another thing to keep in mind is when they're square. Now, as you're seeing, this is a mix of power tools, CNC tools, hand tools. There's quite a lot of work involved with making every one of these banks, regardless of the shape. Now, I'm using a bandsaw here to remove all the scrap material, and then I go with the router and I remove it even more, and then I do touch-up sandings wherever they're needed. Because you have to remember, even hardwoods have their variations in density. So let's say oak, it has a surface density of like 2,000, and poplar has about half that. It's still a hardwood, but it has about half that. But sometimes you still just get some parts of it that are below that threshold. So you can have oak that has sections that are 500 density by comparison. Now, what you see here is I'm using the laser to cut out the front window. And again, the laser doesn't care what I'm cutting out. So that's why I can offer different colors and variations and engravings using the laser because it doesn't matter. 1/8 inch blue acrylic is essentially the same as 1/8 inch yellow acrylic or clear acrylic. The only difference would be polycarbonate, but polycarbonate again cuts pretty much the same speed as acrylic. It's just a lot more expensive material because it is bulletproof glass. And yes, I've made a few banks with bulletproof glass because the customer originally ordered an acrylic one and their kid damaged the bank and broke it. So polycarbonate, and that will outlast the kid. So the final touch up here of what I'm doing is I'm just putting all the screws in, removing the acrylic and getting everything up to spec. This process here is the final step before I actually ship it. There's not a lot of touch-up sanding required. Sometimes I need to do a little bit here and there, but it's extremely minor. And that's because I got my settings down really, really well with the CNC machine to begin with. Having everything at the first step sorted out means all the future steps are so much easier. And again, something that blows me away, the laser makes the acrylic, the router makes the holes for the acrylic, and everything totally matches. And of course, the back of every bank, I do the laser engraving for the logo, but there's also where you can have laser engraving of your personal message or whatever you want on the back of the bank or the front or the side, whatever. I can work either way for you. Don't forget that on SandboxRanch.com, we also have a bunch of other products made on demand as well. So you don't have to only get a bank, you get a bank, 2 different kinds, different shapes, different letters, what have you. We could also customize the shape, so if you want a submarine, you want a helicopter, whatever, not a problem. We can also make other things like matching coasters and that kind of stuff. So the idea behind SandboxRanch.com is to bring a bit of custom to everybody's life, and part of that is making things on demand for customers. But I found over the last year that now I have to start making a little bit of inventory because customers want their stuff now. They don't want to wait a week for it. So if you're looking for custom banks and other made on demand products, mostly wood right now, but I'm also going to metal, go to SandboxRanch.com. You can buy it online or send an email if you're not sure what you want, and we'll make it for you and ship it right to your door.